Our guest tonight is having a busy summer. He's the author of a new book about Marian consecration and has a new online course on personal prayer. Father Boniface Hicks is a Benedictine monk of St. Vincent Arch Abbey in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Since his ordination of the priesthood in 2004, he's served as both a spiritual director and retreat master for men and women in various vocations. In 2010, he also became the programming manager and on-air contributor for We Are One Body Catholic Radio in Pennsylvania and has recorded thousands of radio programs on theology and the spiritual life. Father Boniface is the author of numerous books, including his latest, Personal Prayer, a guide for receiving the Father's love. No, his latest, I'm sorry. That's a classic. His latest is the new one we're going to talk about, The Fruit of Her Womb, 33-day preparation for total consecration to Jesus. But he's teaching now a course on the Personal Prayer book through the Emmaus Academy. So that's pretty cool. So you can get that online. Welcome back to the Busted Halo Show, Father Boniface Hicks. How are you?
Wonderful. Thanks, Father Dave. How are you?
You're at the Arch Abbey. That's the biggest abbey.
The biggest Benedictine monastery in the world.
That's why they call it Arch. So Brett and I were just now on a pilgrimage. We were sailing down the Danube River, and we got stuck and had to change our plans at the last minute. And it happened to be July 11th, I'm pretty sure Father Boniface knows what date that is. It is the feast day of the founder of the Benedictines, Saint Benedict. And so we had to call up a local Benedictine abbey and on their big feast day say, hey, can we bring 150 people for Mass? But as you can imagine, Father Boniface, I mean, what better day to offer hospitality, even at the last minute, would be on your feast day of your founder.
Fantastic. Well done. Excellent.
And they were very nice. There were 17 monks there. So you're saying you've got a few more in Latrobe.
Yeah, that's right. We're the largest in terms of the number of monks. So we have about 160 in Latrobe.
Ooh. Whoa.
But some of those other abbeys are beautiful, big, brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Very
well,
worth seeing.
we also stopped at Melk Abbey, which would be like, you know,
Fantastic.
when they were doing the design and thought they were almost done, and somebody comes in and says, no, way more gold. We need like twice as much gold. So we got a couple. So, but if people think that, oh, a monk, he's just sitting in the abbey, he's praying all the time, he's maybe making some jam or beer. No, you are a busy monk. You got so much going on right now.
Thanks be to God. Yeah, I've been blessed.
Now, you do a fair amount of, as I was mentioning a moment ago, a fair amount of like spiritual direction and talking about prayer. And a lot of that is remote. Sometimes you do things in person, but you're able to do things, thanks to technology these days, remotely.
Yeah, can do a lot remotely. I'm also the spiritual director for the St. Vincent Seminary. So we form diocesan and Benedictine priests. And so get a lot of work there and in the classroom. But I helped to run an online institute for ministry formation. And we have a full online curriculum, MA degree, and certificates in spiritual direction, catechetics, renewal leadership.
Wow.
So a lot of opportunities to do things online and in person. Love it.
Well, you've got a brand new online course from the Emmaus Academy that centers on personal prayer. It's based on partially on a book that you've written that we mentioned, Personal Prayer, a guide for receiving the Father's love. But tell us about, just more generally, what is the Emmaus Academy? Do people have to be like a grad student, or how does that work?
No, so St. Paul Center, Emmaus Road Publishers, they have a lot of things there together. People probably know Scott Hahn is the most prominent figure there. And they decided to start turning some of their books into short courses. So it's 6, I think, 45-minute lectures that are accompanied by some notes. They're beautifully produced. We actually recorded my 6 episodes here at the Arch Abbey. So there's some beautiful backgrounds and B-roll mixed in. And it's really my teaching. The Personal Prayer book is substantial. It's about 300 pages. And those 6 episodes really take you into the heart of it to give you some formation. The Emmaus Academy is a subscription service, so people can plug into that. And then there are quite a few different courses that are taught by Scott Hahn and John Bergsma and some of the other authors through the St. Paul Center through Emmaus Road.
So if you subscribe, you have access to all that.
That's right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So, and it's, great. Show it to other people and really share the wealth. It's wonderful.
Well, maybe, and we can encourage our listeners to do that, but maybe if right now they're driving in their car and they're like, I would love to get a little leg up on personal prayer. What you said, you do 6 episodes, maybe give us a little flavor. Like what are some common hurdles to people's prayer? How do you help people?
I
You're
really
a spiritual director. How do you get people into it?
Yeah. So I'm obviously rooted in the kind of fullness and depth of the Catholic tradition, but people get lost in Carmelite doctors and all of these kinds of descriptions of nights and contemplation, all these things. And so I co-authored it with my own spiritual director, who's been around for in the monastery for 45 years and done a ton of spiritual direction, really we get into the experience of it. So we really try to be honest about what it's like to face silence, what it's like to face dryness, what it's like to how prayer is relational and vulnerable and embodied, how our humanity comes into our prayer, which sometimes includes falling asleep and other times lots of distractions. But so we have 6 chapters on just the different principles around prayer, really trying to be true to the tradition, but then expressing that in very accessible terms. So I've had a lot of from people who don't have much of a prayer life entering into it and finding something they could really latch onto, to priests and bishops who have been at it for a long time and really found a lot of substance that they could go deeper into. So I really think it hits a wide spectrum. And then we have several chapters applying that concretely to how do you do this in Mass? How do you do this at Eucharistic adoration? How do you do this in Lectio Divina with Scripture? How do you do this in your devotions? We have a chapter on charismatic prayer, and then also a chapter on what heaven looks like and what all of this is opening up into in our union with God.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned some of the what we might call the negative aspects, like when I'm not feeling it or when it feels dry, or because I think sometimes because we don't relate to prayer as it truly is, which is our relationship with God. So like any relationship, there's going to be ups and downs. I mean, if you're telling somebody, like a person who's never, like an alien who comes down and doesn't know how to have friends or relate to people, it's like, well, if you just said, oh, it's going to be great and you'll go out to movies and have dinners and that's going to be great. I mean, at some point you have to say, yeah, you might disagree with each other, or you might accidentally hurt one another. You might intentionally be mean at some point and have to kind of forgive. I think many people might struggle with prayer because they give up too easily. Like they have well, nothing happened, I guess that doesn't work. And it sounds like what you want to help form people in is the fact that we're talking about a long game here. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so it's really about not if it's not going to go well or if I'm going to have a dry day, but when that happens, what's that like?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you did exactly the thing that we do repeatedly throughout the book, which is make that relational analogy. We all, if we think about it, have a lot of experience with human relationships. And the same way that we learn to relate, humanly speaking, it's the same kind of muscles that we want to bring into our relationship with God. And so if you want to deepen your relationship, it needs time and commitment, but also vulnerability and our exposing our weakness and really sharing that with the Lord, and then learning to listen to how he speaks to us. And he speaks in a principal way through his word and through the sacraments. And how do we hear that? What does that sound like interiorly? So really try to get our fingers into that. And then, what does it mean when the relationship becomes a little dry? I mean, if it's really the encounter of two freedoms, our human freedom and God's divine freedom, then it's not going to simply be an extension of my will, as if I did all the right things and then it's always going to have the same result. He's a real person and he doesn't simply do everything we want him to do. And so learning to actually relate with him is part of the beautiful journey, as you know very well.
Father Boniface Hicks is our guest here on the Busted Halo Show. We're talking about a new online course he has from the Emmaus Academy based on his book that he co-authored called Personal Prayer, A Guide to Receiving the Father's Love. The receiving bit, I'm great that you threw it in the title, because we probably at some basic level, maybe even many Catholics who have been Catholics all their lives or go to church a lot, we imagine prayer as one of the few aspects and one of the few dimensions that a relationship with God can be, which is our intercessory prayer, when we're petitioning God, when we're asking for something. And imagine, as you said, if you keep up that analogy throughout our understanding and formation in prayer, the analogy of a relationship, what if you had a friend that once a week you asked for a favor and never asked how they were doing, or never stopped, spent time to listen to them? How long would that really last? And at what point we go like, oh, this isn't really a relationship. This is more like an ATM or something.
That's right. Yeah, we really have to learn how to receive his love too. And he tends to move at a bit of a slower pace, and we need to access some more interior things. And we need to give him a little bit more time, and then also learn how to hear him, especially as he speaks through his word and through the saints and through a lot of different ways. But receiving his love is the place to open our hearts and open some of our neediness, our weakness, our vulnerability, and really receive what we most deeply need from him.
I like how you say God's got a slower pace. I guess when you're on an infinite timeline, there's no real rush. Like today, I need to get all this done today. It's like, I've been around a while, and we don't like that. We like the instant pace. Well, Father Boniface Hicks, you're so busy this summer. We wanted to talk about your online course from Emmaus Academy, but you also have a brand new book out. And it's called The Fruit of Her Womb. You've got it right there. The Fruit of Her Womb, 33-day preparation for total consecration to Jesus. Very, very nicely packaged, I will say. And this is the way you describe it. It's following the itinerary of St. Louis de Montfort with selections and writings from the popes and the saints. So, first of all, people may have heard of a Marian consecration. They may be thrown off a little bit by the fact that you're talking about this as a consecration to Jesus. So let's start off with, is it a Marian consecration or a Jesus consecration?
Well, you can't be consecrated to Mary without being consecrated to Jesus.
Boom!
And St. Louis de Montfort himself talked about consecration to Jesus through Mary. So it's always through Mary. She's not the end. She's the pathway. And in a particular way, so as I said, I followed Louis de Montfort's itinerary. He has a 12-day emptying of the spirit of the world, and then a 1 week all about Mary, 1 week, self-knowledge, 1 week about Mary, 1 week about Jesus. That's 33 days. So I followed that basic structure. He didn't actually prescribe readings or just a few prayers, which I included, but he gave that structure. But the piece that I also took from him was doing this through the womb of Mary. So he talks about slavery. I just think you can't do slavery in the United States without a lot of baggage. So
right.
I just, without loss of any of the radicalness, he's pressing on the radical dimension, which is great, and I'm in favor of. But to be in the womb of Mary is also what he talks about, and that's an even more radical surrender than slavery. A baby in the womb really doesn't have anywhere else to go.
Right.
But then there are many aspects of the womb that are tenderness, closeness to Jesus, being nourished, cared for, provided for, that don't necessarily come through in slavery. And that's really what we're doing with Mary, is we are trusting her radically, but we're also receiving from her radically. And in fact, we're receiving from her exactly what we need to be transformed into Jesus, because the way that she nourished him is the way that she will and wants to nourish us. And so that's really what the pathway is intended to do. In some way, it's just, what's consecration, right? Well, in some way, it's baptism. What do we do in baptism? We were immersed in the womb waters, if you will, the baptismal waters of the church, the womb of the church, to be transformed into Jesus, to be reborn, born again from the water of the church into the Son of Mary. And all of us are being formed according to the heart and mind of Christ. And so it's really an intensification of baptism is how I would promote it. And then it has this very tender maternal quality to it that I think most of us can appreciate and really grow in. So,
Father Boniface Hicks is our guest here on the Busted Hale Show, Benedictine monk and spiritual director. And you mentioned this St. Louis de Montfort. Maybe let's back up and just say kind of like, who was he? And had anybody thought of this whole consecration thing before him? And why do we keep doing his method?
Some French guy.
Louis de Montfort.
So he really came out of a beautiful tradition in the French church that originated a little bit before him, in the school of Bérulle and a number of things that St. Margaret Mary also came out of, Francis de Sales in some ways, Vincent de Paul. There was a real richness in French spirituality in the early 1700s. And Louis de Montfort just is one who kind of captured and then especially, I think, became popularized. His consecration was lost for 100 years. He had actually had a prophecy that would happen. And in fact, it did happen. After he died, it was lost and then rediscovered in the mid 1800s. And then John Paul II took hold of it. That was a real turning point in his spiritual journey. And the source of his motto, Totus Tuus, is derived directly from the consecration written by Louis de Montfort, and he really promoted him. So I think John Paul
So it
II,
means
especially,
totally yours. Totus tuus is I'm
totally
totally yours.
yours. Yeah, that's right. So saying that to Mary, again, in the same way that Jesus did, in a very real way, Jesus gave himself radically to Mary to be completely dependent on her as an infant in her womb. And then, so much of his growing up also, his life was in her hands, quite literally. And so
Because we have
the
to remember,
encouragement.
this is the second person of the Trinity that, as we just mentioned, God has been around for. So was Jesus around from all time. And imagine what sort of a humbling that is. Is like, okay, in order to save the human race, I'm going to go and live in a womb, which is what you're talking about. What we're invited to do, live in Mary's womb.
Yeah, that's right. And he shows us so many beautiful qualities. Not everybody is going to be great like you, Father Dave, with a big Zoom, online TV, radio show, and not everybody can do this kind of thing, but everybody can be little. Everybody can be in need. Everybody can be open to receive love. And this is the place that Jesus himself entered into. He became very little. He became needy. He became open to the love that he could receive from a human mom and a human dad. Joseph and Mary nourished him and cared for him and raised him, and he surrendered himself to them. So the path that he chose is a path that we also can find, no matter where we are on the kind of popularity and worldly power spectrum. All of us can be little and cared for by Mary.
Well, and you point out in the book that Jesus, quite a few times in the passages that we see described in the Gospels, makes the connection that in order for us to really follow him, in order for us to really to be children of God, we have to become like children. And I think there's been obviously lots of ink spilled on what exactly that means, but this is certainly one dimension of it.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew 18, 1-5, unless you become like this child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. It's a pretty radical statement. We get a lot of mileage out of Matthew 25 and the last judgment and whatever you did to the least of my brothers. But he in the same gospel said, unless you become like this child. So, but that childlike service, they actually go quite nicely together. A lot of times little children respond to the needs of others in an even more spontaneous and beautiful way. But there is a way that we are made to be radically dependent on God and provided for him and placed into the care of a mother. And I also wrote a book on Saint Joseph. I think we talked about that a previous time, but Saint Joseph is a good spiritual father for us too.
The very prolific guest we have here on the Busted Ale Show is Father Boniface Hicks. He is a Benedictine monk at St. Vincent's Arch Abbey in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And we just mentioned his new online course from Emmaus Academy about personal prayer. Also talking about now his book about Marian consecration, The Fruit of Her Womb, 33-day preparation for total consecration to Jesus. You have at the very end what we call an act of consecration. So if people are still wondering what this means, if I read the book and I love the book and it was spiritually fulfilling, is there something that somebody does? Do they make an actual commitment in some way?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really meant to be a kind of month-long retreat, you might say. Spend about 10 minutes a day to do the readings and the prayers. The readings are meant to be pretty substantial, rich, and worth reflecting on. You could take a lot more than 10 minutes if you want to reflect slowly upon it. And it's really building to something that final prayer of consecration is just a way, as I said, of really intensifying baptism and taking hold of the motherly love that Our Lady offers us, even sort of placing ourselves in her womb. It was something St. Augustine said, all Christians are baptized into the womb of Mary until they're born into eternal life. And so sometimes we don't think of ourselves as being that small or that dependent, but this is a chance to really own that a little bit more deeply and then to discover in her a mother who cares for us and to just make all of that concrete. Again, it's already a reality for all of us in a real way because we're baptized, but to make it more explicit, more intentional, and more concrete is really a important step forward in our life of prayer.
Before I let you go, Father Boniface, you've written a lot about spirituality. You're a retreat leader, retreat master, also spiritual director. A lot of times when people will write in or call into our show, they'll say, is a spiritual director something everybody should have, or what is that? Should I have one? Will that be good for me? How do you describe to somebody if they don't even know, like if you say what you do and they go, what's that? It's like Krista, our producer. Sometimes people go, yeah, what's a producer? What do you do? You know, they ask her, what do you do? So I'd imagine they probably ask you that as a spiritual director, but people are genuinely curious, like, would this be good for me? Is this something I have to like sign up for and then for the rest of my life I have a spiritual director every week or month? Or tell us about how you respond when people ask you, what is a spiritual director?
Well, I like to, first of all, phrase these things on a bit of a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, I would say what Pope Francis said in The Joy of the Gospel, the entire church needs to be introduced into the art of accompaniment. And I think that everybody needs accompaniment. Everybody needs relationships in which they can share their heart, a relationship that's really associated with their relationship with God. And so I think there's space for a lot of accompaniment. And then I would say, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, the highly trained, educated, experienced, wise, charism, whatever, spiritual director. And then there's a lot of sort of in between. There are a lot of spiritual direction programs and a lot of, including the one that I run, and other, others out there. There's actually a service now called seekdirection.app. And that's a place that people can be matched up with spiritual directors who have gone through attested Catholic programs, all of that kind of thing. And they can find some direction either in person, they'll identify by location, or online. So I think it's a great assistance. It's certainly not necessary for everybody by any means. I think there is a particular abundance in our time, both seeking it and providing it. And that's a beautiful way to grow in holiness. But I think everybody needs a kind of spiritual companion, I might say. We need community, we need a parish, we need friends. And I think to have somebody that we can really share a spiritual life with, share our hearts with, is really, really important for growing in faith.
Mention that one more time. The Seek, what did you say? Seek Direction?
Seek Direction, one word, .app, A-P-P.
Okay.
That's the website, and they'll match you up with somebody through that site.
Would that be exclusively Catholic?
They're all Catholic directors. I'm sure they would take non-Catholic directees. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that's the case.
Because I know of a few other clearinghouses that include other traditions in Christianity of spiritual directors. So that's good to know about that one. We will put that on our radio blog, along with links to Father Boniface's new online course from the Emmaus Academy, and also where you can pick up his book on Marian consecration, The Fruit of Her Womb, 33-day preparation for total consecration to Jesus. All of that can be found at bustadalo.com/radio. Father Boniface, thanks for taking time out I know you have to get back to making the jam, the bread, and all this stuff. You know, other people do that. You do the spiritual direction stuff. You gotta get back
It's
to
been
prayer,
such a
though.
joy.
You probably, in these 20 minutes, you probably missed 2 times of Benedictine prayer. You gotta apologize.
He has to catch up.
You guys gotta catch up.
Yeah, I gotta catch up. That's right.
Great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be with you.
All right,
Thanks
take care.
so much.